Hello everyone, welcome to Golang for Pentesters training series. In this series, we will be developing simple security tools, and at the same time, we will explore the standard library. Right from the first video, we will start writing some useful tools. So I will be using Golang by JetBrains as a standard IDE for this series. And at the moment it is free as they haven't released for production, but everything works good so far. So I think this is a good editor to get started. So let me know if you need any help installing the IDE, but it should be pretty straightforward. So once you download it, this is the editor you're looking at, and we will use this is the source location, and training is where we will be doing all the different Golang files. And I will show you the features as and when we go to each video. But for now, so let's write a simple program to get your feet wet. So we will write a simple Nmap like tool to see what are the ports open on a given IP. So for those of you who are not familiar with Nmap, it is a command line or a GUI tool where you can see if a port is open or not. It is a very powerful program, but we will just try to simulate some of the simple features of Nmap. So let's see the IP address of my machine. The IP address of this particular machine is 10.0.1.13, right? So let's see what are the ports that are open on this machine. So I'm just going to do Nmap 10.0.1.13, and Nmap is starting to scan, and it says like port 80 is open, port 135 is open. So we are trying to simulate this or create a similar program which detects what ports are open. We are not going to identify the service at this time, so we're going to keep things simple, and we are going to see only the ports that are open. So the way it finds out if a port is open or not is by doing a TCP connection to the system. So basically it tries to connect to the open port, and if the port is open, you get a response back, and the program sees the port is open. And if the port is not open or closed, it will get a timeout, and then so the Nmap program detects that the port is closed. So we will try to see a similar functionality in Golang, and we will see if we can reproduce that, right? So let's go to Golang's documentation. So there is a net package in Golang, and Golang's documentation is excellent. So you should be able, once you get the basics, you should be able to follow along and learn anything you need from the documentation. So there is a package, a library called net.dial, and you can say the protocol, which is TCP. The other commonly used protocol is called UDP, but we will stick to TCP for this tutorial. And you can give the IP address or the DNS name and the port that it needs to go to. So if you look at it, if there is no error, or if the error is not nil, which means there is an error, which means that it was not able to connect on port 80. But if there is no error, it tells us that something is listening on that port, and we can fairly assume that the port is open. So along the same dial, so net is a package and dial is a function within that package. So there is also another function which is similar. So let's search for that. So it's called DialTimeout. So as you can see, it is a function, and it takes a network. In our case, it's going to be TCP, and the address, which is going to be the IP address : the port number, and the timeout. So this is the reason we are trying to use this particular function instead of dial. So we will use the given port to see if we get a timeout. So if the timeout comes, it means the port is closed. If there is no timeout, the port is open, right? And this is what we are going to use for this particular tutorial. So let's create a new file, and you can call it whatever you want. And we can say one port, because we're going to just scan for one port. So we will get the user input for the IP address and the port, and we will try to use that the dial package or dial timeout package to see if the port is open or not. So let's start. The first line is typically a package main, but once you start creating different libraries, I'll show you how to create different packages to build different modules together. But for now, if you're writing simple programs, just use package main. And like any other language, you need to have a bunch of imports, and that should be the second thing you need to do for Golang. So let's import some standard library, and I will tell you what each one means after typing. So net package is for calling the dial function or dial timeout function. And I think that's pretty much it. So FMT is used for formatting text, and net package is used for calling the dial timeout function, which we saw, which is this one. And everything is under the net package. So after doing all the imports, so now we can create the main function. So the main function takes no arguments at this time, and you can start writing your code. So let's get the user input for the IP address and also the user input for the port to scan. So in this case, we are just using one IP and one port, and we're just trying to scan and see if the port is open or not. So if the port is open, we will present a message saying the port is open. If not, we will say the port is closed. So to get an input, so let's give a nice text. So println is something to print usable text for the users. So we can say enter IP address to scan, and we can say colon. And then once the user enters something, we can do just print, because I don't want the new line after they enter the IP address. And once they enter, we need to take the input into a variable. So let's take the input and store it in a variable, and that uses scan function. And then you have to put an ampersand, and then you can use any variable you want, but let's say IP, which is more relevant in this case. So now that we have the IP, the next stage is to get a port number, right? So let's do another print, and then we can say enter port to scan. So again, like we did before, we need to store that value in a variable. And ampersand is what you just pass the address of the variable, so the value is stored in that particular variable. So don't worry if you don't understand everything. The main goal is, so we are starting small, and as we go on, we will be doing the same thing repetitively. So everything will be understood after some time. So let's call it port for the port variable. So let's if you look at the standard library, so if you look at the dial function, you need to dial using this format. So it has to be IP address colon port number, right? So let's try to format and into a variable to get that particular format. So you can use like a printf function to format the IP address and the port. So you can do %s colon and another %s. And then percentage, you have to substitute what the value is, which is IP comma port. So if you print the value now, actually let's go ahead and do that. So we have to store this in a variable. So we can say host and IP. So this is how you assign a value to a variable. So you say host IP colon equal to, and then the formatted value. So let's print this host IP before we go further. Right? So let's try to build and see how it looks so far. I know it's very simple, but we are going to start slow, and we will build small feature as in for each video series. So if you go here, you can just click on this file, right click on it and say run that particular file name. And we got a bunch of errors, which you can see in the bottom window. This opens automatically, right? So it says net package is imported and not used. And you can see there is an undefined variables IP, undefined variable port. And again, you see the same error again. So let's fix these two errors for now. So we can define a variable in Golang by using the keyword variable, a var, and IP. And the type is going to be string. So I think that will take care of that particular error message. And then similarly, let's do for port. So in this one, we're using IP and port to be string, because whenever user enters something, it is by default, it is stored as a string. So let's build one more time. So now we have only one error. So it's saying imported and not used. So this is one of the important features in Golang. If you declare a standard library like this, you are required to use it. And again, if you define a variable, you are required to use it. And Go forces this good practice, so that there is not any unused variables within your program. So for now, we will be using this net package, but for now, just to get rid of this warning or error, let's comment it and then let's build it out. Okay, it's saying enter IP to scan right here. And so like you saw in my previous value, we're trying to scan this IP address, right? So in my machine, this is the IP address. In your system, it could be something different. So so it's saying enter port to scan, and let's do 80 and then press enter. And right now it is printing this value, which is what we wanted it to, because it is in the same format as the standard library right here. Okay, so which is good. So now let's continue. So next step is to call that DialTimeout function which we saw. So for that, let's remove this line because we're going to use it. So we are going to call a connection. I will explain what this is in a minute. Error. And then so basically we're going to call some function, and we're going to assign it to these two variables. So in Golang, it can return more than one value, and each return value is stored in the corresponding variables. So the function, if it returns two values, those two values will be stored in con, and then error is stored into the error variable. So we're going to call net, and we're going to call DialTimeout, and then the first value, you can see the IntelliSense coming here handy. So the network, it's asking for what kind of network. So we're going to be using the TCP, and the second is the address, so which is what we already have, so which is host IP, and the timeout, right? So that's one of the reasons we're using. So we don't want to be waiting forever. And so we will give a timeout for 10 milliseconds. That should be plenty. Since this is a local system, I don't think it's going to take that long. So let's keep 10. And then you multiply by time by, we're calling another package called time. and millisecond. Okay, so there is one thing that's nice about this editor. As soon as you type a package which is not imported, it automatically imports it. So let me show you again. So let me delete this thing, and then since this is used, and let me go save the file. See, that thing is so the editor puts that thing back again, the package again. It's the same thing with any other import. So let's take out this format, and since we are using format, the editor will be kind enough to add that for us automatically. You see that? It doesn't matter which order it goes in. Okay, so this function, let's go back to the so if you look at this function prototype, so when you call the function, it returns two. One is the connection, and then the second is the error, right? So that is the reason we are using connection error, right? So once you do that, so now the error variable will have a value. It can be either nil or it could have a value. So if it is nil, it means we were able to connect to that port successfully. So we can assume it is open. If we get some kind of an error, we can say the port is closed. So let's do that using an if statement. So we are saying error not equal to nil, which means the port is closed. And you can see the editor puts the braces for us automatically. And then we can say print ln, we can say port % or %s is open, and then we can say the port is port, right? The PO, that is the user input, right? And we can say else. Again, in Golang, the else should be in the same line as this closing braces. If not, you'll be getting a compile time error. So let's do format, print, and then we can say port %s is closed. And then same port, right? So this is pretty simple. And so if we get an error, which means the port is closed, and I'm sorry, if a thing should be reversed, this should be closed because we get an error, which is a timeout error or some other error. If we don't get an error, we can assume it is open. I mean, it could be false, but this is a simple assumption we can make at this time. So let's build this one for now. Okay, so this one we saw before. So it says connection is declared and it is not used, which is this variable. In the future videos, we will be using this variable, but in this case, we are not using it. And one simple way to get rid of this warning is just to do an underscore. Oops. So you can just do an like this. So if you do that, we are telling the compiler, hey, don't worry. I know there is a value coming back, but I'm not worried about it at this time. So the compiler will be glad to take that, and it will not complain to us. So now let's build it again. So now I think this is good. So let's try to scan. So let's pick one port which was open before. So you see port 135, right? That was open before. So let's try to do 135. It says port %s is open. Something is not right. It says its %s is not working. So we cannot use print line. If you want to do some formatting, we can do like printf, and okay, and that is the one that will substitute these values. So the reason it takes too long for this video is I want to explain the simple, the libraries that I used. And these are some of the functions which you will be using in almost every program. So let's run it one more time. You can also use the play button here to run it. And let's use a port 443 for this time. And it says 443 is open. So let's do a port which is not open. which is, let's say 555, and it says port is closed. Okay, I think that is what I wanted to explain in this video. In the next video, we will see how to scan a bunch of ports, not just one port, but let's say 5-10 ports for the given IP address. So we will see you in the next video. Thanks everyone for your time.